The neighborhood was built like a dream. Rows of luxury waterfront homes lined the banks of the sparkling lake, their sprawling glass walls reflecting the calm water each morning like a scene from a postcard. For years, homeowners had boasted about the million-dollar views, the serene waters, and exclusivity of their homeowners association, which promised to keep the neighborhood pristine, orderly, and prestigious. But like so many HOA-controlled communities, behind the facade of manicured lawns and fancy, gates brewed tension, control, and petty battles over power. The story begins with one homeowner who lived on the farthest edge of the lake. His property, unlike most others, was slightly cut off from the main road that circled the community. To reach his driveway conveniently, he had long relied on a small but sturdy wooden bridge he had built himself, leading directly from the main access road across a shallow inlet. The bridge wasn't fancy, but it was functional, safe, and practical. For years, it stood as a quiet lifeline, shaving minutes off his daily commute and making his property feel fully connected. But the HOA had other ideas. They had never liked the bridge. At first, it was whispers in meetings about aesthetic uniformity and unauthorized structures. Later, it became formal letters, citing supposed violations and threats of fines. The homeowner pushed back, pointing out that the bridge had existed long before the current board members even purchased their own properties. He reminded them it was built entirely on his land and maintained at his own expense. None of that mattered. The HOA board, emboldened by their power and enamored with enforcing rules down to the smallest detail, decided the bridge had to go. The morning it happened was like a punch to the gut. Heavy machinery rolled into the quiet neighborhood. Workers contracted by the HOA at great expense. Without even notifying him that today would be the day, they tore into the wooden beams, splintering the structure in a matter of hours. The bridge that had stood for years was reduced to rubble and hauled away like garbage. When he confronted the board about their actions, they smugly pointed to a clause buried deep in the community guidelines about non-approved exterior modifications. To them, this was about compliance, uniformity, and making an example of him. But to him, it was about something much bigger. That bridge wasn't just wood and nails. It was a symbol of independence, of convenience, of his right to make reasonable improvements to his property. And now, thanks to their pettiness, he was left with an inconvenient detour each day, forced to loop all the way around the lake just to reach his own driveway. The HOA didn't care. In fact, they seemed almost pleased with themselves. The board president even remarked at a meeting how the neighborhood looked cleaner without the bridge cluttering up the inlet. That moment sparked something in him. Where most homeowners might have grumbled and accepted the loss, he stewed in quiet determination. If the HOA wanted to play power games, he was ready to play back, only harder, smarter, and on a scale they could never anticipate. Because unlike most homeowners, he had both the resources and the connections to strike at the very heart of what the HOA valued most, the lake itself. You see, that beautiful, shimmering lake wasn't natural. Decades earlier, the land had been reshaped by developers. A small river had been dammed, creating an artificial reservoir around which the luxury homes were built. The HOA maintained the lakefront landscaping and docks, but they didn't own the water. They didn't own the dam. That structure, quietly operating upstream, belonged to a private owner, a man who was nearing retirement and had been looking to sell. Few in the neighborhood even knew the dam could change hands. Fewer still had considered what power it represented. But he knew, and after the destruction of his bridge, he knew exactly what he was going to do. It started as research, old county records, water rights, and property deeds. Each late night of digging revealed more opportunities. The dam was not just a piece of infrastructure. It was the lifeblood of the entire community. The carefully maintained waterfront views, the docks, the real estate values, all of it depended on that water staying where it was. With the right purchase, he wouldn't just be a homeowner battling his HOA. He would control the very thing that made their neighborhood prestigious. As weeks passed, his plan solidified. His frustration transformed into cold strategy. He reached out to the dam's owner, met him in quiet negotiations, and secured a deal that would transfer full ownership into his hands. The HOA had destroyed his bridge in a petty show of control. Now, He held in his hands a power to reshape the entire neighborhood. When the papers were signed, he drove home past a glittering lake with a quiet smile. None of the other homeowners knew yet. The HOA board was still smug from their victory, but soon they would realize the cost of crossing him, because if they thought tearing down his bridge was the end of the story, they hadn't seen anything yet. The weeks after the dam purchase passed quietly, almost deceptively so. Life in the HOA community continued as normal. Neighbors walking their dog along the shore, kids splashing in the shallows, pontoon boats gliding slowly across the calm surface. The HOA board, proud of their latest victory over the bridge, continued to hold their monthly meetings, discussing lawn violations, paint colors, and who had left their trash bins out too long. None of them had any idea that the very ground beneath their power was about to shift. The homeowner, however, knew exactly what he held. With the stroke of a pen, he had gone from an embattled resident to the single most powerful figure in the neighborhood's ecosystem. The deed was clear, the water rights confirmed. The dam, and by extension the lake, belonged to him. He spent hours studying the technical details, flow controls, emergency spillways, and maintenance obligations. It was more than just property. It was control over millions of gallons of water, the shimmering jewel upon which the HOA's wealth and image entirely depended. At first, he considered keeping the purchase quiet, letting the board stew in their ignorance while he planned his next steps. But the more he thought about it, the more he relished the idea of the reveal. The board had humiliated him by tearing down his bridge in front of the entire community, and he wanted them to feel the same sting of helplessness. They had flaunted their control, but their authority stopped at the edge of the water. His extended far beyond it. The reveal came during one of the HOA's monthly meetings, which he attended regularly despite their hostility. That evening, as the board droned on about landscaping contracts and dock repairs, he waited patiently, listening with a calm smile. When the topic of lake maintenance arose, a routine discussion about algae treatments, he finally spoke. He reminded them, with deliberate precision, that the lake was not HOA property. Then he dropped the bombshell. As of 2 weeks prior, he was the legal owner of the dam that controlled it. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Board members glanced at one another, confused, skeptical, even dismissive at first. But when he placed the deed on the table, stamped and notarized, the usmood shifted instantly. Their smirks vanished, replaced by pale faces and hurried whispers. They had stripped him of a bridge, yet he now controlled the water that lapped at the edge of their $7 million homes. Panic set in quickly. The HOA president, flustered and red-faced, tried to insist the lake was a shared community asset. Others muttered about lawsuits, about county regulations, about how surely this couldn't be true. But deep down, they all knew he had outplayed them. The board, so used to lording their power over residents, had finally run up against someone who understood leverage better than they did. From that night forward, the dynamic in the community shifted. Whispers spread from home to home. Neighbors who had once avoided him now eyed him with a mix of curiosity and fear. Some stopped him on his evening walks to ask if it was true. Others sent cautious, polite emails, trying to gauge his intentions. The board, meanwhile, scrambled in private meetings, desperate to find a legal angle to claw back control. But the facts were against them. The dam was his. The water was his to control. And he was not inclined to be generous. His mind returned again and again to the sight of his destroyed bridge, the smug faces of the board members as they congratulated themselves. He remembered the weeks of inconvenience, the arrogant dismissal of his rights. Now he thought they would understand what it felt like to be powerless. At first, he let the tension simmer. He didn't act rashly. Instead, he made small moves, subtle adjustments that reminded them of his control. He restricted access to the dam for safety inspections, forcing the HOA to beg for updates on water levels. He sent polite but firm notices that any modifications to shoreline structures, such as docks or bulkheads, now required his written approval as the water rights holder. He even hinted, in one carefully worded letter, that he was considering raising the annual water use fees. The board's frustration boiled over, but they were trapped. Every time they attempted to challenge him, he presented another signed document, Another legal citation. Another reminder that the system they had weaponized against him was now working in his favor. They had boxed him in with bylaws and rules. Now he boxed him in with deeds and rights. Behind closed doors, however, he was planning something far more dramatic. Owning the dam gave him not just authority, but power. Power to alter the very existence of the lake. With one decision, he could drain it, turning their glittering waterfront properties into dry, muddy wastelands. Real estate values would plummet, docks would sit stranded, and the prestige of the neighborhood would vanish overnight. It wasn't a choice he took lightly. Draining the lake would be permanent, a nuclear option. But the thought of watching the HOA scramble as their empire literally evaporated brought him no small satisfaction. They had underestimated him, mocked him, and taken what was his. Now, he had the chance to deliver a lesson they would never forget. Late one evening, he stood at the dam's control platform, staring at the massive steel gates and listening to the hum of rushing water below. The keys to everything were in his hands. The HOA thought they had stripped him of power when they destroyed his bridge. In reality, they had handed him the motivation to seize more power than they could ever dream of. The question was no longer whether he would use it. The question was when. In the end, the HOA's arrogance cost them everything. By tearing down one bridge, they provoked a man who bought the dam and drained their lake, leaving their $7 million waterfront mansion stranded in mud. Property values collapsed, the board resigned in disgrace, and the once prestigious neighborhood became a cautionary tale. He had lost a bridge, but gained victory, proving no HOA rulebook could stand against true leverage.